The scout's final transmission was only 6 seconds long. 6 seconds of static, a sharp gasp, and the words, "Something's breathing inside the trees." Then silence. Not static. Not garbled data. Nothing. And in the cold alien command center orbiting above Earth, silence wasn't just a glitch. It was a threat. Commander Yovek's 3 jaws twitched in unison as he replayed the audio on loop. Around him, the bridge crew of the survey vessel Torval whispered among themselves in clicks and chirps. Sector 8 had been labeled Zone Silence, an uninhabited forest stretch deemed ecologically primitive, marked for stripping and biome harvesting. The trees had tested positive for trace minerals. The rivers pulsed with methane-rich water. By all alien standards, the place was ripe for profit. But now, for the second time in 2 cycles, a scout had vanished. And the transmission wasn't a distress call, it was a confession. Yovek growled low in his throat and waved a tentacle across the control pad. "Send in Recon Pair 4. And tell them to stop panicking. It's a forest, not a war zone." He ignored the low clicks of concern that followed. The crew knew better than to argue. He'd been through the storms of Viwiretech. He'd walked across the lava fields of Parnix while half his armor melted. A few trees and squirrels weren't going to scare him. Recon Pair 4 dropped through the atmosphere 20 minutes later. Their pod hissed as it touched down in the same clearing the first scout had landed. Unlike the others, these 2 came armed. Plasma pikes, atmosphere shields, and scanning drones pre-linked to command. They moved in perfect sync, military precision, zero emotion. And for the first 100 yards, it was just that, perfect. Birds chirped. Wind rustled. They followed a faint trail marked by broken branches. Then the trail stopped. And the forest got quiet. Not silent like absence, but quiet like presence. Like breath held. Private Lysh glanced at his partner. "Scans showing movement," he said. Corporal Das muttered back. "Same. 11 meters west. Could be a deer." He raised his pike. The air shimmered. A blur darted between 2 trees. They spun, triangulated, and found nothing. Das launched a recon drone. It buzzed through the canopy, scanned the heat signatures, then returned with a flicker. When the playback hit command screen, someone in the data chair made a sound not unlike a scream. The image showed a humanoid figure crouched in the branches, unmoving, eyes reflecting infrared light like an animal. But it was wearing gear. Patches. Boots. Not tribal. Not native. Military. "Pause feed," Commander Yovek snapped. Zoom. On the figure's chest, a faded tag barely readable through the haze, ran MD Spec Ops. The name meant nothing to the aliens. But the rank? That caught attention. Spec Ops. As in Special Operations. As in Earth's War Ghosts. One of the navigators whispered. "Didn't Earth ground its military 15 cycles ago?" "They grounded the official ones," said the technician beside him. "Not the off-books." Back in the forest, Recon Pair 4 kept moving, unaware that every step was measured, every leaf disturbed triggering subtle reactions. They passed under a vine that wasn't a vine. It snapped tight, dragging Lysh into the trees with a choking yelp. Das spun to help, and a spike trap slammed through his atmosphere shield into his leg. He dropped, blood hissing against alien armor. Lysh's comms squealed as he fought above, gasping, dangling upside down from a canopy snare. And then, his voice cut in on all command channels. "I saw him, he's laughing. He's just standing there, laughing." Click. No more voices. Commander Yovek cursed in 4 dialects, and flung his command stick across the room. "He's one creature," he hissed. "One Earthborn ape. And you're telling me he's picking off trained recon units like pests?" Someone tried to remind him that the terrain was unfamiliar, that traps were primitive but effective, that tactical advantages often stemmed from knowing the land. He ignored them. What he didn't know was that Ren hadn't just survived in that forest. He'd rebuilt in it. Lived in it. Trained in it. Every tree, every hill, Every stream had been woven into 100 escape routes and 50 ambush paths. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was his domain. Down below, Ren knelt beside Das, now unconscious and webbed in homemade fiber mesh. He stripped the alien's weapon, looked it over, and chuckled. Fancy, he said to himself. 2 bad it glows like Vegas in the rain. He heard something move behind him and rolled, drawing a modified earth revolver. Silent, custom-made, and ugly as sin. The raccoon that emerged from the ferns just blinked at him, and waddled off. Ren relaxed. He glanced at the sky and muttered, "Still watching, aren't you? You little purple freaks." Then he gave a little salute and melted into the trees again. Back on the ship, the mood had changed. No one spoke unless asked. The command board flashed red on half a dozen sectors. Surveillance data was being eaten, literally corrupted, as if something had jammed it using magnetic interference from within the forest. One tech dared to ask, "Should we deploy suppression drones?" Ylvik didn't answer right away. He stood by the viewport, staring down at the green mass below. It looked harmless. Peaceful. The kind of place you'd send a child to hike. But inside that peace, he now suspected, lived a predator. Not because he wanted to kill, but because someone had taught him too well to be caught. And worse, he seemed to be enjoying this. As the bridge lights dimmed for long-range skin recalibration, a final signal from Earth reached the communications hub. Not from the forest. Not from any human base. Just coordinates, with a single phrase included in perfect alien syntax. "Welcome to my hunting grounds." Ylvik stared at it for a long time. Then he turned to his second-in-command. "Send another team," he growled. "Full armor. All weapons authorized." But even he knew they wouldn't come back. Not all of them. Maybe not any. Because the forest wasn't empty. It never was. Not since Ren walked into it 10 years ago, and didn't walk back out. And now, the forest had teeth. The forest had always been a quiet place, but since the aliens arrived, it had taken on a kind of charged silence. The kind that pressed against your eardrums, made your heart beat louder than your footsteps, and made even the birds too nervous to sing. Down below the thick canopy where sunlight filtered in strips, the terrain wasn't just uneven, it was a memory puzzle of old wars, buried bunkers, and forgotten training grounds. Ren hadn't chosen this forest by accident. He'd chosen it because no one who didn't know the land could survive it. Not for long. And now that the outsiders were here, they were going to learn what decades of silence and paranoia had shaped him into. A human who wasn't hiding from the world. He was training for something that didn't exist. Until now. The second retrieval team landed just before dawn. 6 aliens in heavier armor, bulkier than the scouts, with faceplates that could lock in multiple spectrum views. Their weapons were no longer for tagging wildlife or scanning trees. These were designed for urban sieges, melting barricades and punching through concrete. But this was no city. This was Ren's cathedral. The commander of the unit, Vosk, was not nearly as arrogant as the bridge leader above. He had heard the old stories. About human soldiers who went feral after wars, who lived in the dark corners of Earth long after peace treaties were signed. He didn't fully believe in ghosts. But after reviewing the last scout's audio, he had begun to believe in something worse. Men who didn't fear death because they had nothing left to lose. And if the human was still alive down here, he wasn't surviving. He was preparing. The 6 moved in 2 groups, fanned out with drone cover and thermal surveillance. They followed the trail of the first squad, watching for tripwires and irregular heat signatures. But they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not just followed, but watched, as if their movements were anticipated before they even chose their next step. After the first hour, they found the vine trap. The broken strand dangled like a warning. Beside it, a pile of feathers from a bird that had been torn open and left as bait. It wasn't eaten. Just placed. A message, maybe? Vosk squatted next to it, frowned under his mask, and said nothing. The others tightened formation. An hour deeper into the forest, they found Das. or what was left of his armor. It had been folded, literally folded like paper, around a tree stump. The pieces had been stacked beside each other in the shape of a seated figure. A hand-drawn smiley face on the torso plate was the final insult. No blood. No weapon. No message. Just a prank made from fear. Vosk ordered a full lockdown. Movement triggers. 360 perimeter. Still, it wouldn't matter. They had already gone too far in. The drones began to lose signal shortly after. One by one, the feeds cut out. Static. Black screen. Then, from one feed, a glimpse of something impossible. A human figure walking upright, holding a captured plasma pike like it was a garden tool, casually swinging it over his shoulder. No helmet. No armor. Just mud camouflage, wild eyes, and a long, slanted scar across his nose. He stopped. Looked directly at the drone. Smiled. And then waved. The drone exploded seconds later, not from interference, but because something struck it from behind. A rock. Thrown with deadly accuracy. Vosk barked orders. The troops moved faster, but with every turn, they found more tricks. A makeshift tripline of bones, carved with alien words. A pit trap that one nearly fell into, filled with sharpened wood and smeared with scent chemicals designed to confuse their armor's filters. The tension boiled over when one of the soldiers opened fire on a raccoon. The shot missed, burned a tree, and triggered a cascade of vines that fell across two others, binding them in a tangle of sticky fiber netting. They screamed. Not in pain, but in panic. They had been trained for brute war, not for psychological traps that whispered how weak their training really was. Ren watched them from high above, silent and unmoving. The forest was louder to him than any radio. Every footstep, every brush of bark, every whimper in an alien tongue came to him like sonar. He could smell their tension. He could feel their lack of rhythm. It had taken him years to learn the song of this forest. These things were out of tune. The song would punish them. At sunset, one of the aliens strayed from the group while chasing a heat signature. A faint red pulse deeper in a thicket, not moving, just glowing. He approached it slowly, cautiously, stepping around thorns and ducking under branches. When he reached the source, he found an old earth canteen sitting on a rock. Still half full. Engraved on the side, MD Ren. He leaned in to scan it. That's when the rock underneath gave way. A trapdoor flipped. He fell into blackness. The others heard him scream for 2 seconds. Then they heard nothing. When they reached the hole, there was no bottom in sight. Just a well. Old, stone, and echoing. When they sent a flare down, it burned bright for a second, then something extinguished it halfway. Something wet. Vosk cursed and ordered an immediate regroup. But when the last soldier returned to their rally point, one of their own was already there, armor slashed open, slumped over a fallen log. His helmet had been placed beside him, not taken. It was facing outward, as if keeping watch. In its reflective lens, a smile had been scratched in with a blade. It wasn't cruel. It was playful. Like a signature. The unit no longer moved with discipline. They staggered. They spun at shadows. They stopped trusting their HUDs. They even began speaking aloud, something forbidden in field missions. But silence was no longer their ally. Silence belonged to the forest. It was its language. And right now, they were foreigners shouting through a holy place. Back at the ship, Commander Yilvek had grown quieter. Reports were coming in slower. Static had become normal. The 3rd Recon Team was preparing for deployment. But for the first time, no one wanted to be on it. The term Earthborn wasn't just a planetary designation anymore. It was becoming a classification of threat. Like apex predator. Like anomaly. The bridge technicians began drawing up escape protocols. In private, of course. Ren moved through the treetops that night like a phantom. No sound. No trail. He paused only to watch the sky. They were still up there. Watching. Measuring. Making decisions from so high up they thought gravity didn't apply to them. He lit a cigarette made from pine bark and sap, took one drag, then crushed it out on the visor of a disarmed plasma mask. He placed it neatly at the base of a tree and walked away. The forest rustled behind him. As if it was saying good job. As if it was proud. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But in his head, he was already planning tomorrow's surprises. The kind that didn't kill immediately. The kind that made enemies go home without looking back. That was the real trick. Not scaring them. Convincing them they were never in control to begin with. The heat signatures on the command deck screens began to flicker like candlelight. Alien analysts scrambled to compensate, recalibrating thermal and magnetic sensors, but nothing held steady. One technician finally removed his headset and muttered what everyone was thinking. The forest wasn't broken. The forest was fighting back. Down on the surface, the second team was down to 3 soldiers, all of them shaken, one of them injured from a failed jump between ridgelines. Their comms had degraded to static drenched bursts, and their drones had all gone dark. At first, they believed the local foliage had some natural electromagnetic interference. Now, they were beginning to believe something smarter was interfering on purpose. Something that wasn't just reacting, but orchestrating. Wren had spent the morning setting up a distraction. He used a combination of fire-gutted branches, heat gel packs, and an old solar battery from his cabin to create a false human body signature in a dense hollow. When the aliens picked it up, they converged with speed and aggression, surrounding the source from 3 angles. What they didn't see was the perimeter they had just entered. Each point of entry was rigged with small traps, not lethal, just humiliating. One triggered a glue burst that jammed a plasma rifle. Another caused an explosion of colored powder that blinded infrared sensors. The third released a high-pitched tone that only their species could hear, forcing 2 of them to their knees in agony. Wren didn't even need to watch the aftermath. He'd heard the stumbles, the grunts, the curses, and he already knew their formation had fractured. That was all he needed. The alien named Vosk was breathing heavily through his mask. The adhesive had partially fused the outer vent, and his voice came out distorted and wheezing. He tossed the disabled rifle aside and tried to regroup his men, but one of them had gone silent, vanished after triggering the sound trap. Vosk was alone with one other, a private with shaking hands and a damaged visor. They backed away from the decoy site slowly, thinking they were leaving the trap behind. But Wren's approach wasn't about single traps. It was about setting off a chain of errors that spiraled. Panic made creatures stupid. Stupidity made them predictable. He followed them quietly for a while, not attacking, just watching. He noted their gait, how they leaned more to the left when tired, how their heads pivoted with a quarter-second delay when facing sound. He watched them move like wounded animals pretending to be predators, and when he was satisfied, he vanished again, deeper into the woods. At the edge of the forest, flames had begun to lick at the treetops. Alien Command, desperate to flush out whatever was inside, initiated a controlled burn protocol without clearing it with upper councils. It was a violation of planetary interference rules, but no one cared anymore. The commander wanted the forest razed. Scorched clean. But fire, as it turned out, didn't move the way they expected here. The winds shifted suddenly, unnaturally. The flames curved back inward, swallowing a field of alien-deployed fuel pods and engulfing 2 unmanned landers. From the air, it looked like the forest was breathing in fire, not expelling it. One drone managed to capture something truly strange. Trees bending. Not snapping, not breaking, bending. As if something was pushing them away from Wren's location. As if the forest itself was trying to shield him. Wren saw the smoke rising but didn't rush. He knew their thinking. Fire meant panic. Panic meant exposure. They wanted him to run. Instead, he sat on a mossy stump and watched the flames shift direction. He knew that ridge. He'd reinforced it years ago with buried ammonium tanks and low-yield pulse fuses. Not enough to cause damage to nature, but enough to trick any scanner into reading it as volatile terrain. Fire would never stay long there. The moment it got hot enough, the sensors would trigger the diversion, a sudden gas vent that would redirect the flame like wind, confusing even seasoned field tacticians. He didn't need to fight fire. He just needed to let it exhaust itself. In the bunker 2 miles north, the widowmaker drone lay dormant. It had been buried beneath rock and roots, preserved in an old cold storage cache left over from Wren's last mission. It was Earth tech, yes, but modified beyond standard protocol. Semi-autonomous, with targeting systems adapted for environmental warfare. Wren had not activated it yet. He was saving that for a statement. For when the alien command finally stopped whispering and started screaming, he made his way there by twilight, boots silent on leaf rot, stepping over his own buried traps like a man walking across familiar floorboards. At the cache entrance, he keyed in a 5-digit code etched into the bark of a nearby tree, flipped a switch hidden under a mossy rock, and listened as the stone slab hissed open. The drone stood like a spider sculpted from matte steel, a jagged machine with eyes that didn't blink. He tapped the side once, then stepped back. The thing came to life without a sound. Widowmaker had been asleep too long. It was hungry. The remaining aliens didn't see it until it was already among them. No engine noise, no ignition. Just motion. It moved low and fast, spraying colored gas that shut down optical sensors, deploying small sonic blasts that ruptured comms. It never fired a lethal round. Not once. But by the end of the encounter, one alien had dropped their weapon and curled into a ball. Another had clawed off their helmet in a frenzy, only to get tangled in one of Wren's vine traps and fall into a mud pit. Vosk stood his ground the longest, shooting blindly into the gas, cursing in his own language, trying to summon support. Widowmaker circled him 3 times and then stopped directly in front of him. Vosk aimed point blank. Pulled the trigger. Nothing. His weapon had jammed with moisture from the forest. Widowmaker hissed. The sound was more like laughter than threat. The drone didn't kill him. It simply played back a recorded message. Wren's voice. Calm. Tired. But amused. You could have left. Now you're part of the game. Tell your boss I've got plenty more traps and only one rule. No one comes back the same. Then the drone disappeared back into the trees. Vosk didn't chase it. He didn't move at all for several minutes. When he finally spoke again, it wasn't into a command channel. It was into a private recorder hidden in his chest plate. A confession log. He said, if anyone finds this message, don't send reinforcements. Don't try to take the forest. Burn the map. Seal the sky. Forget this zone exists. And if you hear laughter coming from the trees, run the other way. Because it's not laughter. It's the beginning of something worse. Back on the alien mothership, the bridge lights dimmed as a power flicker surged through the comms deck. Systems began auto-restarting. The main feed showed nothing but trees still and quiet. But just before blackout, one last image flashed through the signal. A scarecrow. Standing alone. Dressed in captured alien armor. And hanging from its chest plate, a handwritten sign carved in charred metal. Try again. I dare you. The decision to deploy the commander himself was not made lightly. Alien protocol dictated that high command officers remain off-world unless the probability of planetary collapse dropped below 70%. But this wasn't about probability anymore. It was about pride. Commander Yilvek had heard enough rumors from the lower decks to poison the war. Some of his officers were refusing surface deployment. Others whispered that Earth wasn't primitive at all, that it had faked weakness, bided time, waited to spring this forest as a trap. And if that idea spread to the inner council, his authority would collapse. So he put on the command armor. The one forged in the gravity mines of Vaultek. The one said to survive orbital re-entry and full plasma shell impact. He stepped into the dropship without a word and activated the descent with his own claws. The crew watched in silence as he vanished below cloud cover. He landed in the clearing that once housed the first scouts. Nothing remained of their pod except the melted edge of one landing strut and a blackened circle where fire had tried and failed to consume the soil. The air was heavy with moisture. Nothing moved. Even the birds seemed to have learned that staying hidden was better than dying curious. Yilvek surveyed the treeline with a slow, precise scan. No motion pings. No heat trails. Only dense undergrowth and intermittent static interference. He took a step forward and paused. A chime echoed through the trees, clear and hollow, like a wind chime made of bones. It wasn't natural. He turned toward the sound, visor narrowing as he zoomed in on the source. Hanging from a low branch was a makeshift device. Old Earth tech. A motion-activated speaker welded to a rusted drone chassis. A passive trigger. He scanned it quickly, saw no threat, and moved forward to disable it. As he approached, the speaker clicked and began to play. Not a voice. A tune. It was soft, strange, not quite mechanical. A melody. Something human. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. He reached for the device. How I wonder what you are. Then it exploded in a flash of powdered dye and sound. Non-lethal. Purely theatrical. But the message was clear. Yilvek had been marked. And now the forest knew exactly where he was. He regrouped with 2 remaining soldiers from the last retrieval team, battered and wide-eyed. One had removed half his armor and wrapped his legs in moss, claiming the suit made him easier to track. The other flinched at every breeze. Yilvek gave them no comfort, no acknowledgement. If they had survived this long, they were either extremely lucky or already broken. He issued a single order. Sweep the forest outward. Burn anything that moves. Leave nothing unscanned. They obeyed with numb nods, but even he could see their weapons shook slightly in their claws. Deeper into the trees, Wren watched from a perch 30 feet above the ground. The commander had finally come down. Good. He'd been saving a few tricks for this one. Not traps. Not misdirection. No, what he had in mind was old-fashioned discomfort. Wren adjusted his scarf, moved to another branch, and took a bite of dried jerky while tracking their path. He wouldn't kill them outright. Not yet. This needed to be personal. Yilvek's team pushed further in, burning brush, marking trees, deploying sensor spikes. But every time they mapped terrain, it changed. Rock formations shifted. Trail markers reversed. One soldier swore the same owl had flown past them 3 times in different directions. When they pulled up the forest layout on the digital map, it looked nothing like what they'd seen. The system began glitching. Overlays looped. Directions inverted. One screen displayed coordinates from a different hemisphere. They weren't just lost. They were being turned around. Wren used magnets. Old, buried hardware synced with scavenged Earth beacons that scrambled alien systems. A primitive trick. But so effective it made him laugh. He let them wander, tracking them through subtle cues. Broken ferns, disturbed moss, snapped spiderwebs. He waited until the commander split from the others, moving ahead toward an elevated ridge. That was the point. Isolation. As Yilvek climbed the slope, he passed an old structure buried in green. Just visible under vines and leaves was a rusted military sign. He didn't recognize the language, but the tone was unmistakable. A warning. He stepped through the threshold and into the hollow. It was a chamber. A bunker of some kind. Quiet. Cold. Lights flickered on. Not electric. Natural light filtered through skylights built into the canopy. The walls had been painted with scenes. Charcoal and blood, maybe. Drawings of alien helmets. All cracked open. Some with vines growing through them. At the center of the room was a chair. Empty. Facing away. Something was in it. But it didn't move. Yilvek raised his weapon. Scanned the figure. No heat signature. It was a dummy. Constructed from old armor and branches. A decoy. Then the door slammed shut behind him. He turned, fired, blasted it open. Smoke hissed from the edges. He stepped out. And Wren was there. No words. No sound. Just a flash of motion and a blow to the side of the helmet. Yilvek staggered. Swung around. Fired blind. Missed. Wren moved like mist. No armor, no shield. Just bone, muscle, and momentum. He swept the legs, drove an elbow into the chest plate, twisted the alien's own weapon out of his claws and threw it aside. Yovek retaliated with a gauntlet punch that dented a tree. Ren ducked, slid, kicked him backward into a hollow log. Before the alien could rise, Ren was behind him, a blade at his throat. Yovek didn't speak. He just froze. Ren leaned in, breath steady. You came down here because you thought I was a threat. He pressed the blade tighter. You were wrong. Then he stepped back, kicked the alien's dropped weapon toward him, and vanished into the trees. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. Just gone. Yovek stood slowly, bleeding from a tear in the side of his mouth. He retrieved his weapon but didn't pursue. Instead, he made a slow, limping return to the landing zone, silent. When his surviving crew saw him emerge from the trees alone, they didn't ask questions. They simply readied the ship. No victory. No body. Just silence. Back in orbit, the mothership received the extraction signal with no mission success tag. Command reviewed the report, noted the absence of any confirmed kills, and filed the encounter under anomalous terrestrial resistance. The last entry was brief. Zone silence remains uncontrollable. Subject presumed active. Recommend full planetary avoidance. And in the forest below, Ren sharpened his blade under a pine tree, watching the sky dim. He didn't hate them. Not personally. But if they came back, he'd be ready. He always was. Because this wasn't just a hiding place. It was home. The extraction vessel tore through the clouds with all the fury of a retreat, not a mission closeout. Inside, Commander Yovek sat in the rear compartment, helmet off, one arm locked in a brace, the left side of his jaw pulsing with internal bruising that would take cycles to heal. No one spoke. Not the two surviving soldiers, not the pilot, and certainly not Yovek himself. He stared at the floor, not in anger, but in confusion. Something had cracked inside him in that forest, and it wasn't just the armor. He had trained on volcanic moons, led sieges in sandstorms that ate metal, survived spacewalks in radiation belts. But none of those places ever watched him. None of those places had eyes in the trees. Back in orbit, the command bridge flickered with uneasy motion. When the hatch hissed open and Yovek stepped off, the silence wasn't ceremonial. It was terror. He looked around at the crew, officers who once stood proud and rigid now avoided his gaze. He could smell it on them. The doubt. The rot of morale. They were thinking it. If the commander had been spared, maybe it wasn't mercy. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe he had been allowed to leave. Yovek made no public statement. No debrief. He walked to the war room, locked the door behind him, and didn't re-emerge for several hours. When he finally opened a channel to the Central Council, his message was short. Do not approach Sector 8. Mark the territory as off-limits. He ended the call before they could ask why. Before they could see how much fear sat behind his stillness. Down on Earth, the forest was returning to calm. The smoke from the controlled burn had vanished, carried away by rains that came as if summoned. The branches no longer shook. The birds returned. Even the raccoons had gone back to stealing anything shiny from Ren's traps. He watched one now from his hideout, a fat little beast dragging half of an alien boot across a mossy path like a trophy. He smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but out of appreciation. They understood survival better than most creatures. Take what's useful. Ignore what isn't. Never let curiosity get you killed. Ren stretched his back, wiped the dried blood from a cut under his ribs, and took a sip from his canteen. The forest had kept him alive, but it hadn't done the work. That part was still his. It always had been. He ran a whetstone along the edge of a salvaged blade, one of the cleaner alien knives. Lightweight, slightly curved, and easier to throw than most human combat knives. He had started a collection now, not for glory or sentiment, but because he knew this wasn't over. Retreat didn't mean surrender. It just meant they changed their approach. At the perimeter of the old command bunker, he'd begun setting something new. Not traps. Not sensors. Messages. He carved symbols into trees. Ones he had seen on the alien helmets, mimicked with just enough accuracy that it would make their scanners pause. He took branches and bent them into strange shapes, anchoring them with strips of metal cut from drone parts. A warning. A claim. The forest had been passive until now. That would change. He wanted the next drone they sent to see a landscape marked not with resistance but ownership. Not only was someone here, he was in charge. 3 days later, a recon satellite passed over the zone. Its purpose was simple. Map out what remained of the scorched region. Log radiation readings. Verify flora regrowth. It was unmanned, quiet, efficient. But as it drifted over the northern ridge, something interrupted the data stream. An image. A direct feed burst that overrode standard logging. When analyzed, the image showed a humanoid figure in the center of a clearing. Not moving. Just standing. It was a scarecrow at first glance, but closer examination revealed it had been crafted from alien armor plating, human rags, and a drone panel shaped like a chest plate. On it, scrawled in dark paint, was a phrase translated instantly by the satellite's onboard linguistic software. You lost the forest. Don't lose your nerve. The image was flagged, quarantined, and sent up the chain. Within 2 hours, it had been erased from the official records. The satellite was ordered to redirect orbit. No explanation was issued. Just a shift in command behavior. New missions were assigned to other hemispheres. Sector 8 was removed from rotation. In the following weeks, rumors spread like spores. Not just within the alien fleet, but across their allies. Some said the Earthborn had developed forest weapons, living bioweapons capable of camouflage and memory. Others whispered about a ghost soldier, one built in a lab and left behind as a failsafe. A few believed the forest itself had become sentient, and chosen a human to be its guardian. No two stories matched, but they all ended the same way. Don't go back. Inside the forest, Ren slept lightly beneath the roots of a split oak, his gear hanging above him like a mobile. He'd left one plasma rifle out in the open. Not as bait. As evidence. He knew someone would come looking again. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not even this season. But eventually. That was the nature of machines and empires. They couldn't ignore unsolved problems. They only delayed them. He dreamed of the last conversation he had before disappearing into this place. A friend from his unit had offered him a way out, a quiet post somewhere tropical, a villa with a fence and guards and therapy twice a week. But Ren hadn't needed therapy. He'd needed quiet. Not because he was broken. Because silence was the only way to hear what the world was actually saying. Now, that silence had teeth. When he woke, it was still dark, but not fully. The stars were out, and the forest shimmered with their reflection. He could hear water moving gently in the creek beyond his camp. Frogs, wind, and a single soft crunch, too deliberate to be animal. He didn't panic. He reached for a nearby branch, pulled it slowly into position, and rolled sideways out of his bed of leaves. A raccoon stared at him from 3 feet away, chewing on what appeared to be the torn-off finger joint from an alien gauntlet. Ren exhaled. Sat up. Looked around. Then he laughed. Not a loud laugh. Not a mocking one. Just a quiet, tired chuckle that echoed against the trees and made even the wind hesitate. Because this was his world now. His kingdom. His war was over. But if they came again, he'd welcome them. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. And the forest was ready with him.